One of the most unusual stories about the American Revolution is the very good relationship between, of all people, George Washington on the one hand and Benedict Arnold on the other hand. And that is a story that is really not very well known in modern culture. Most people think of Washington as the true hero of the Revolution, and I think that's a very fair assessment. And others think of Arnold, or I guess almost everyone thinks of Arnold, as the true villain of the Revolution. They're sort of like bookends. You don't think of them actually coming together in some capacity. But as the Revolution and the war was breaking out in 1775, the two of them got to know each other, and they became very effective in their ability to work with one another. And that's sort of the story that I want to talk about in actually three segments. And the first segment is really about brothers in arms, and I'm referring then to, of all people, George Washington and his good friend, Benedict Arnold. Actually, the two of them met in August of 1775, shortly after Washington had been named commander-in-chief. He had gone up into the area of Massachusetts. He was trying to organize something that we will call the Continental Army, eventually get around to the point where you can call it an army. And Benedict Arnold has also been in that area. In fact, he got involved in the war even before Washington did. Washington was named commander-in-chief in June of 1775, but Arnold was actually part of a group that took the fortress at Ticonderoga on May 10th of 1775, and Arnold will go on. He works not too happily with the Green Mountain Boys, with Ethan Allen, but Arnold will be up in that area for well over a month trying to establish an American presence on that very critical fort at the base of Lake Champlain. And the broader point about that is that there is a natural waterway that runs between New York in the south and Montreal in the north, 350 miles. And you pass through Lake Champlain, the Richelieu River as you go north, the Hudson River as you go south. And that's a very important corridor for understanding the Revolution, because in that time in 1775, the Revolution was actually confined primarily to New England. So British strategy will be, and Arnold knows this, he's already written to the Continental Congress about it, that the British strategy is going to be to try to take that natural corridor, the water corridor, and in the process of taking that corridor, you will really sever New England, the head of the rebellion, from the body, the rest of the colonies. You then sweep eastward, you move the Navy in on the water side, and you crush the rebellion in New England. So these two men then meet in August of 1775. And the idea then, and it's an idea that Congress has agreed to rather reluctantly, is to actually invade Canada, to send not one, but two armies into Canada with the idea of capturing Montreal and capturing Quebec. Washington is very much in favor of this idea, and this is the beginning of their relationship. Those two men meet, they discuss this plan. Washington decides that Arnold's the man. He appoints him a colonel in the Continental Army, and Arnold is going to lead one of those armies actually up through the Maine wilderness, uncharted territory, to Canada, and it's going to take him a good while to get a small force before the walls of Quebec in November and December of 1775. Meanwhile, the second force will go up, will capture Montreal under General Richard Montgomery. That force will then move over, join Arnold in December of 1775. The idea is to take Quebec, to capture Quebec, and to bring Quebec, the province of Quebec, the bulk of Canada, into the Revolution as the 14th colony in rebellion. Now, I should stop and point out that Arnold and Washington are not working together, and rarely do they work together on military assignments. Arnold is a very effective officer, dynamic. Washington appreciates his dynamism, and so Washington uses him for many detached commands of various types and kinds, as we'll see as we go along. And so this very important detached command goes, well, not too well. Montreal is captured, but on the very last day of 1775, late at night in the driving snowstorm, Montgomery and Arnold try to get into the walls of Quebec to take that city, and it's a disaster. Montgomery is killed, Arnold is seriously wounded, and that's really the end, in many ways, of this attempt to take Quebec province. After that time, for the next 4 or 5 months, Arnold and others will be involved in basically backing out of Canada and sort of reorganizing themselves to deal with what will then in turn become a British invasion, or I should say an attempted British invasion from the north up through Lake Champlain that will occur in the fall of 1776. Now, Arnold will then be involved in the next few months in what was a slow retreat out of Canada, and he will be getting out of Canada by June of 1776. But in the meantime, Arnold has come to be known as America's Hannibal because he has climbed through the mountains, and he's gotten an army through the mountains in Maine and into eastern Canada to get to Quebec, on the one hand. And Washington has had nothing but good things to say about Arnold. He calls him a persevering and enterprising officer. I'm quoting directly from Washington correspondence when I use those terms. And also he's very concerned about Arnold's leg and the injury to Arnold's leg, and he's very solicitous of Arnold's health. Well, this is very important because now Arnold has proven, even though he's backing out of Canada, he's proven that he's a dynamic officer and that he's capable of real leadership. And what this will lead to then, to sort of wrap up this phase of the Arnold-Washington story, is Arnold will be given command through Washington, through General Philip Schuyler, of a naval fleet on Lake Champlain. And this is in the summer and fall of 1776. And can you imagine this? Benedict Arnold had no military experience. Before the war, he's a very successful merchant. He would captain vessels between the West Indies and Connecticut, captain vessels all the way up into Canada to Quebec and Montreal. But he has no real military experience, but he has leadership experience as a ship's captain, and he applies that. And what's going to occur is, in an incredible battle that we Americans really don't know enough about, called the Battle of Valcour Island on October 11th of 1776, Arnold will stand tall against a superior British fleet bringing troops, bringing weapons, bringing Native Americans, whatever, out of Canada to begin that process of invading from the north, the idea of getting to Albany, bring a British army up from New York because the British have secured New York in late summer of 1776, and that's all part of that plan to recapture New England. So Arnold plays a very critical role in this, in delaying the British. That British force moves into Canada, and then Arnold will come south, and he will meet with Washington just before the famous victory at Trenton. And in that situation, Washington will select Arnold to then go east, another detached command, because the British have established a military base at Newport, Rhode Island, for their naval fleet. And so they send Arnold, because there's another commander involved that Washington doesn't think much of, and Washington was right about that, a man by the name of that was Joseph Spencer. And the bottom line is they send Arnold, and it's really looking good. The problem is the Congress wanted Washington to send Horatio Gates. Arnold had worked successfully with Gates in the Northern Department, but at this point, the two of them stop really getting along because now Washington has favored Arnold, a junior brigadier general at this point, over Gates, who is a higher-ranking general. And this will lead to all sorts of problems that we're going to see as we proceed to the second segment about this very interesting and important relationship between Benedict Arnold and George Washington.